Please join me in welcoming to the Distinctive Voices podium Linda Bartoshuk and Harold McGee.
Thank you. I didn't know you were an astronomy major to begin with as well. So was I. I left astronomy for gastronomy. So anyway, thank you all very much for coming. It's a pleasure to be here, pleasure to be speaking with Linda. And we're going to be talking about two different perspectives, I guess you'd say, on the experience of eating and drinking. Linda's going to really dive into the details, and I'm going to stand back a little bit and talk about the kinds of experiences that are out there these days for people who are especially interested in food and drink, some of the more esoteric things that are going on these days. Flavor tripping, I guess, is the current term for the experience of people getting together and focusing on the experience of tasting foods and other related materials just for the sake of that sensation and for the kind of stimulation it can provide, intellectual as well as sensory. And just to give a little historical context, I want to start by talking about the fact that this is nothing new. In fact, human beings have been doing this kind of thing for forever. Last year was Charles Darwin's bicentenary, and it turns out that he was a flavor tripper. He doesn't look like it maybe in this photograph, but if you read the biography of him by his son, it turns out that when he was at Cambridge, he was a member of a club called the Glutton Club, which met regularly to taste strange things. And this is a little excerpt of a description of what they used to do to make experiments on birds and beasts which were before unknown to the human palate. I'm not sure that, in fact, any of these things were unknown. I'm not sure that anything at all is unknown to the human palate. The human palate has been exploring for a long time, but they tried hawks and bitterns and old brown owls for fun. That was flavor tripping in the 19th century. And it turns out that flavor tripping goes way, way, way back. When you enjoy spices, for example, herbs and spices, oregano and basil and rosemary and things like that, it turns out that you're really doing something that you might, when you step back from it, turns out to be a little odd for human beings to do. If you ask, why do these plants, why do these foods, these very favorite sorts of flavors that we have the flavors they do? It turns out that they owe those flavors to very specific molecules in those plants. And we know what those molecules are. Here's a representative sample of them. Then you can go ahead and ask the question, okay, those are the compounds responsible for the flavors we love. Why are they there in the plants? And when you ask that question, it gets really interesting. And the Darwinian perspective on nature becomes very useful. It turns out if you buy a purified version of the taste of thyme or a purified version of the taste of oregano, these things are toxic. They say don't let these anywhere near your skin, to say nothing of your mouth. And yet we enjoy them and love them in dilute form, in herbs and spices. And the reason for that is that for the plant, these are chemical weapons. These are scenes from the Mediterranean. I just wandered around with a camera and asked, where is it that thyme and rosemary and oregano and things like that grow? They grow in very exposed, dry areas where a stray slug or a snail is not going to have any other choice except to eat those things. And so these plants, which are very exposed, have to defend themselves from creatures. And they defend themselves with these compounds that if you take a rosemary or a thyme leaf and you bite into it straight, it's not at all pleasant. But you put it into a stew and it's great. So we've been flavor tripping from the very beginning. And just a very different example, but another example of how we human beings can perversely find pleasure in the strangest things. Surströmming is intentionally rotted fish. I won't go into the details of how it's made, but you do everything you can to make it go bad. And when you do so and then analyze the chemistry of the flavor, what you find are compounds with these names, and the reason they have those names is that that's where you find them. And this is prized, I'm told, by the people of Sweden. So human beings like all kinds of strange things. And so the things I'm going to show you later on coming out of restaurants that are doing experimental sorts of cooking these days are not that strange compared to some of these things that human beings have indulged in the past and continue to. So traditional gastronomical research and development is, I think, well illustrated in this painting from the 19th century in France, where a patron, rich patron who can afford all kinds of nice ingredients and has a very refined taste, works with a cook to develop, the best version of this particular sauce that goes with that particular meat or vegetable or something like that. So it looks here as though the cardinal has been working on some, refinement on a sauce. He's happy with what he's come up with. The cook isn't so sure, but he's not going to say anything. That's the way dishes were developed and refined in the old days. Things are different now. This is research and development in the 21st century. It began, this movement in the 20th century, with this man who made the front page of the Times Sunday magazine. Ferran Adrià is his name. He's Catalonian. He's essentially a self-taught cook. And he decided, for interesting reasons, in the late 1980s, that he was going to stop cooking regular restaurant food and start inventing. He heard a chef say, to be creative means not to copy. And a lot of cooking is copying. You make the dishes that you've been taught to make or that are the dishes of your region, and you try to make the best versions of them. And maybe you tweak them a little bit the way the cardinal was his recipe. But it's essentially making something over and over again. He decided, that's not for me. I'm going to start from now trying to make dishes that have not been made before. And not only that, next season, when my restaurant opens for the following year, I'm not going to repeat anything that I did the year before. And on and on and on. That could be a recipe for disaster. It turns out he was a genius, and so for him it worked. And he has come to be the leader of what I would call an experimental movement in cooking, a movement that thinks that cooking, in restaurants anyway, is not just about satisfying the customer's expectations for a particular dish, or even nourishing you, giving you a square meal. In fact, what they think is that we've only begun to understand what it's possible to do with food beyond simply nourishing people. That the senses are there for more than just nourishment at this stage in human evolution. And so these are some examples from what is a very long list of principles that he and his restaurant have put out. But they're representative. Cooking is a language through which all the following properties may be expressed: harmony, creativity, happiness, beauty, poetry, complexity, magic, humor, flying up to their provocation. In some cases means actually trying to displease you, not give you pleasure, but to annoy you. But to annoy you in a way that gets you thinking. Odd for a restaurant experience, yes? Maybe theater, but a restaurant. Number 7, new technologies are a source for progress in cooking, so they're going to use any tool they can to do something interesting. And then the information given off by a dish is enjoyed through the senses, but it is also enjoyed and interpreted by reflection. So the dishes are not just meant to give you pleasure, pure and simple. They're meant to stimulate you in a deeper way or a more complicated way. So what I'm going to do now is give you a quick run through 20-odd dishes that show what it is that these people are trying to do. And the interesting thing about them is that chefs doing this kind of cooking in restaurants are actually very well read in modern sensory science. In fact, they form collaborations with university scientists so that both sides can benefit, so that the university scientists can do some research, and so the restaurant can get some new dishes. And very interesting things have come out of it. I wouldn't necessarily say they're going to be the end of pizza, but it's really interesting stuff. And there's several different sorts of strategies that they'll use to do this kind of thing. And I'll be giving examples of all of these, but some of them show more than one principle at work. But they'll try to make flavor especially intense. They'll what they call deconstruct a dish, so take something familiar and pull it apart into its flavor elements and then recombine them in a way that's not obvious so that you taste it and it's familiar but strange at the same time. They'll disguise flavors so that you get something and you know you've tasted it before, but you still have no idea what it is. They will introduce aromas and flavors that don't come from foods into foods, so they're unaccustomed sensations in the context of eating. They'll present foods along with a kind of ambient aroma, which is meant to influence the way that you experience that particular food. And they'll also mess with temperature and with sound, which you might think, what does sound have to do with the flavor of something? It turns out that it seems to have something to do with the experience of flavor. So, Ferran Adrià, the man who started this movement back in the late 80s, has done lots and lots of different things, and this was one of the first, where he's impaled a raw shrimp, on a little pipette, something that he got from the lab, which can hold a little bit of liquid and then squirt it out whenever you want it. So he's impaled a raw shrimp on that, and at the end of the pipette, he's also got a piece of fried shrimp head. So he's got raw shrimp, fried shrimp, and then a very concentrated shrimp juice inside. And the idea is that you put this in your mouth, pull the two pieces into your mouth at the same time that you squeeze the juice into your mouth, and you get all three at the same time. I can't eat shrimp, so I've never tried this. But I'm told that it is a very intense experience because you're getting three different versions of the same food, all of which you've had at some point in your life, but never all together at the same time. This, I think, is one of the things that is really impressive about him, which is that he'll rethink the whole concept of something and turn it into something not only delicious but beautiful. So he was thinking about ravioli. How can you do something new with the idea of ravioli? And the thing about ravioli are that the thing about ravioli is that they are opaque, right? They're essentially flour wrappers for something that's interesting on the inside, and the sauce is interesting on the outside, but the wrapper itself is just pasta. Pasta has its points, but it's not as interesting as either the sauce or what's inside. So he thought, how can I make the wrapper as interesting as everything else? And he came up with these wrappers, which are transparent, so that you can see through them and see the contents, and just gives a kind of jewel-like appearance to the dish. But it also turns out that he's come up with a basic principle of cooking that allows you to make those wrappers from basically any flavor you want. So he's made these with veal consommé, which means that the wrapper is as intensely flavored as any other element in the dish, besides being beautiful to look at and allowing you to see what else is there. And he did this very simply by mixing in just the right proportions gelatin and agar, which is a seaweed thickener used a lot in Asia, not so much in the West, although more and more, used in petri dishes, of course. And the story about how scientists discovered agar for petri dishes is very interesting and has to do with cooking. No time for that. If you mix them in the right proportions, you get something that's flexible but stable in a way that a gelatin gel wouldn't be. And so it's a generalizable thing. You can make a version of this with almost any set of flavor combinations you want. caviar is delicious and intense in the kind of flavor it delivers, in part because, of course, what you have with caviar is this little ball of fish egg, which, when you put it in your mouth and pop it, releases its flavor very quickly. And one of the things that one of the general principles of sensory science is that the brain is designed to, or the whole system is designed to notice changes in sensations, not kind of long-term steady state sensations. So this sudden release of something that's very intensely flavored is part of what makes the experience of caviar so wonderful. Ferran Adrià asked himself, how can I make caviar, again, out of anything? And he came up with a way of doing that. This is caviar made of melon juice. And he discovered that if you take a certain different seaweed carbohydrate, not agar, but alginate, you can treat it in such a way that you add a little bit of the alginate to the melon juice, which you can flavor with other things as well, and then take a drop of that and immerse that drop into a combination of water and a salt of calcium, calcium lactate, calcium citrate, can be a bunch of different things. Turns out that the seaweed carbohydrate will actually form a gel in the presence of calcium, but not otherwise. So you mix the carbohydrate with the melon juice, nothing happens. You put a drop of that into the calcium water bath, and from the outside in, it begins to gel. And you can determine how thick the layer of that gel is going to be by how long you leave it in the calcium water bath. At the right moment, you lift them out, serve them, and they pop in your mouth like caviar, but again, with whatever flavor you want. This is an example of deconstruction, of taking the elements of a dish apart and recombining them in ways that are surprising. The point here, and with a lot of these dishes, is simply to get you to pay more attention to what's happening. If you order risotto Milanese, and it's a great example of a risotto Milanese, the story's kind of over, right? You have an expectation, it's been satisfied, you're done. You're just eating more and more of the same sensation. The feeling among chefs who do this kind of thing is if you can surprise someone, if you can give them a dish that, or a combination of flavors that they're familiar with, but in a presentation or a context that's different, then you're going to pay more attention because something's not making sense. You're going to be surprised, you're going to pay more attention, it's going to be a more memorable experience. So this is a risotto Milanese where what look like rice grains are actually very carefully carved bean sprouts. So they look like rice grains. An army of volunteers in the kitchen has been cutting them to look exactly like rice grains. And so you put them in your mouth, and instead of being like rice, soft, they're kind of crunchy and fresh. And then the other components of the flavor, the saffron, the Parmesan cheese, the butter, are in other various components of this. The foam, there's a kind of cream underneath. So all the flavors are there, and when you mix them together, it kind of does taste like risotto Milanese, but it's not risotto Milanese, but it is. Wiley Dufresne is a wonderfully inventive chef in New York. His restaurant is called WD-50. And what he's done is he takes ideas, dishes from sort of the American mainstream and does a twist on them again so that you think you know what you're getting and it turns out you're getting something different. In this case, his restaurant is an upscale restaurant, and he has on that upscale menu chicken McNuggets, or chicken nuggets. I guess he can't call them chicken McNuggets. But what he's done is use an enzyme, which in the trade is the cooking trade is known as meat glue. To chemists, it's known as transglutaminase, but it basically takes two different proteins and bonds them together. And so you can use that to take two different kinds of protein-rich food or ingredient and bond them together. So Wiley also does a version of surf and turf, fish and meat, in which he actually takes a piece of fish, takes a piece of meat, and bonds them together so that they're the same piece of food. This is a chicken nugget in which he likes to think of as sort of the ultimate chicken nugget. So it's a piece of breast meat from, of course, an organically raised, locally, sustainably produced chicken, surrounded by a piece of thigh meat, which has been bonded to it with meat glue, surrounded by a piece of skin, which has been bonded to it by meat glue. So you've got a nugget of all the bits of the chicken, the best bits of the chicken, the tender, delicate part on the inside so it gets cooked the least, and then the thigh, which needs more heat on the outside, and the skin on top to be browned. The ultimate chicken nugget. This is his version of Eggs Benedict, and you might ask, where is the egg and where's the sauce? It's a little hard to see from this photograph, but the egg is the yellowish thing that the piece of bacon is sticking out of. And the sauce is actually those cubes. He's figured out a way, again, using ingredients that aren't standard in traditional kitchens, to form hollandaise sauce into a cube, freeze it, and then deep fry it. So it's deep fried hollandaise sauce, which you then cut into, and it spills out. Oh, and the English muffins, they're the breading on the cubes. Jose Andres started out at El Bulli in Ferran Adria's restaurant, and then moved to Washington, D.C., and started a little empire of his own there, and has now got an outpost in Los Angeles at Bazaar, and it's a wonderful place. I highly recommend it. This, again, is along the lines of deconstruction, taking something familiar and breaking it into its pieces. And here he's taken literally the idea of a wine being composed, the aroma of a wine being composed of lots of different notes. So what he's done is made a jelly that is made from the juice of, say, the Chardonnay grape. So it's not Chardonnay wine, it's Chardonnay grape juice. And this is served, by the way, with a glass of Chardonnay wine. Jelly of Chardonnay grape juice, and then on that grape juice he's got little pieces of all the flavor notes that the wine experts tell us are in the aroma of Chardonnay wine. And the idea is that you have a little bit of the juice and one of the flavors, and put that in your mouth and see what that's like, then have a sip of the wine and see if you notice that correspondence. The wonderful thing, one of the many wonderful things about this dish, it's almost like gastronomical calisthenics, because you have a little sample of one of the flavors, and for some of them it's obvious what they are, but for others it's not. And you put it in your mouth and you say, oh yeah, that's, but because it's not in the context where you can easily recognize it, it can be on the tip of your tongue and you just can't retrieve it from your sensory memory. This dish was something that he started in a restaurant within a restaurant of his called Mini Bar, where there are 6 seats at the bar and they only serve 6 people per seating. And it becomes a kind of communal thing because there are as many cooks as there are people eating. You're all talking about what it is that you're having. And my experience was when I couldn't come up with what that particular bit of the Chardonnay aroma was, somebody next to me had figured it out. And so it ended up being this kind of experience of sharing the experience of deconstructing and then reconstructing the flavor of a white wine. So again, it's not a relaxed, just have a glass of Chardonnay and that's it. It's actually, as I say, more like exercise, more like working out and learning more about what it is that you've experienced and what you're experiencing. Heston Blumenthal is an extraordinary chef in England, has a restaurant called the Fat Duck, and I know that Linda has experienced this dish. And this, again, is meant to, Heston is someone who has a wonderful sense of humor, and almost every dish that he serves you has some kind of little quirk to it. And this was one of the dishes that he used to use to put you off balance at the very beginning of the meal, to make you realize, okay, you've got to pay attention to what's about to appear on your plate. So you're given this plate, and the waiter says, these are orange and beet jellies. Enjoy them. We suggest you start with the orange. And so you go ahead and you have a taste of the orange, and then depending on how much attention you're paying, whether you're already engaged in conversation with your dinner partner or what, either you notice or you don't notice that the orange-flavored one, or the orange one, tastes like beet. It's golden beets, and the red one is, of course, blood orange. It's a wonderfully, the first time, of course, because it's hard to fool you twice, but the first time it really is disconcerting and makes you realize how much you take for granted using your other senses. You look at something and you think you know what they're going to taste like. We always say, you eat first with your eyes. Sometimes your eyes deceive you. Wiley Dufresne serves, again, something that's a surprise. It looks like a sunny side up egg, but he's used some of these funny seaweed carbohydrates to make something that looks like an egg white and looks like an egg yolk. But in fact, the egg white is gelled coconut milk, and the egg yolk is one of these caviar-like, except much larger, versions of carrot juice. Carrot juice and coconut milk, which I did not think was a great combination. Certainly surprising, but I wouldn't say pleasing. He's also done a similar one where the white is mozzarella and the yolk is a golden tomato. And that was delicious. And he'll also he's come up with, again, a generalizable way of making a consommé, a really concentrated liquid, flavored liquid from anything, absolutely anything. And he's always got 2 or 3 different ones on the menu per day. And it's not going to be lamb consommé or chicken consommé or anything as simple as that. This is a lamb dish served with a pretzel consommé, and it was surprising and amazing. Okay, shifting now to surrounding foods with aromas. Grant Achatz has a restaurant in Chicago that engages in this kind of experimental cooking, and he's especially interested in environmental aromas. Bringing things into your experience of a food that aren't actually in the food itself, but you sort of import them because you're breathing the air at the same time that you're eating the food. And so there's an example at the lower left of a grilled piece of lamb that's embedded in some very hot eucalyptus leaves. And it's brought to the table that way. You get this really strong aroma of eucalyptus, which is not at all nice in the mouth. Any of you who've ever done that will know that. And eucalyptus-flavored cough drops, I've never seen the point of them. But as an environmental aroma, as something that kind of accompanies the flavor of the lamb without getting into your mouth, it's wonderful. And then lower right, he's put a bunch of flowers, aromatic flowers, onto a hot plate underneath a soup. So you get the aromas of those flowers without actually having to put the flowers in your mouth. And again, flowers are something that are often better smelled than eaten. Lavender, for example, which a lot of people will put into dishes of various kinds, Provençal dishes. And to me, they end up tasting a little bit like soap because of the associations we have with lavender. But again, as an environmental smell, it's not so bad. And then his wonderful invention at the top right is a pillow that's filled with air, but the air is scented, and it's in a bag that's permeable. So they pump this pillow full of a bag full of, say, cinnamon aromatized air, and then we'll place the dish on top of that, bring it out to you, set it in front of you, and the weight of the dish slowly compresses the pillow and forces out this aroma of cinnamon. So again, you don't put it in your mouth, but you get the aroma. And then a friend of mine in San Francisco, Daniel Patterson, starts out the meal by giving you a sorbet with a certain set of aromas, and then also a perfume made with the same set of essential oils. And you're invited to put some on your skin, the perfume that is, and then smell it, and then have a bit of the little sorbet, and then back and forth to think about the difference between what it is that you're tasting in your mouth and what it is you smell of those same essential oils coming off the skin. And of course, the perfume lasts over the course of the meal. So the waiter will come back every once in a while and say, so how's the, I think this was, pink grapefruit, tarragon, and black pepper. And it evolves over the course of the evening. And because you've been paying attention, you can track that. And I'm going to run really quickly through these last few because I'm taking too long. One of the things you can do in modern cooking is separate flavor, aroma anyway, completely from the place that it originated from. You can get yourself a little vial of the essence of whatever using a rotary evaporator, which is essentially a high-tech version of what you see in the upper left, something that they found from thousands of years ago, which was the way perfumers first extracted aromas from plant materials. So this is just the high-tech version, the efficient way of doing that same thing. So this is a Spanish chef who has taken things that are dark-colored or intensely colored, like chocolate, passion fruit, tonka, and coffee, extracted their aromas very intensely, and then turned them into a sorbet, a jelly, a cream that all look white. They all look like they've been made with lemon juice or something, but they all have these flavors that we associate with intensely dark or deeply colored foods. So again, it's very startling. We're tasting the essence without seeing any of the signs that we normally associate with them. And his brother, who is the savory chef, used the same technique to make an oyster embedded in a jelly, and this is a variant on the surf and turf. The oyster, of course, is from the ocean, but instead of the turf being meat, the turf is literally turf. What he's done is distilled off the aroma of the earth. And so what you sense when you put that little jelly in your mouth is the flavor of the oyster surrounded by what gives you the impression of walking through a forest. Not a food flavor, but a kind of environmental flavor. And Heston has made a puree that has the flavor of leather. People often talk about leather being a component of wine aroma. Well, now you've got leather. And I'm going to skip over this one and tell you instead about this one. This is a cup of tea that is hot and cold at the same time. He's made it by essentially making a jelly of a hot tea and a cold tea, and then blending those jellies so that they're liquid but they're still thick. And then he pours both of them into a single glass while they're still hot and cold, and they don't mix for some time. If you serve it quickly enough, then the person can put that cup in front of the mouth, pour it in, and you get hot tea on one side, cold tea on the other side. And it's an unusual experience. And then I'll finish with this because, and this is an example of university restaurant crossover. Heston Blumenthal was working with a sensory scientist at Oxford who had demonstrated that the flavor rating that people will give of a given food can be altered by the kind of sound that they hear at the time that they're eating the food. And the classic example of this, the best studied example, is crispness and potato chips. If you bite a potato chip and you make the right sound in a pair of headphones, you can convince someone that it's either soggy or crisp, depending on the sound that you make. And they did a bunch of various other studies, and Heston came up with the idea of intensifying flavor by giving you a kind of ambient sound that you associate with that flavor. And so he came up with this dish called Sound of the Sea, where there's a kind of breadcrumb mixture that represents the sand. Embedded in that are all kinds of bits of seaweed and shellfish and that kind of thing. And then there's a foam that represents the ocean, and it's flavored with fish, with seaweed, with all the sorts of things that you would think of that would give the impression of the ocean. But before this dish is placed in front of you, you're instructed to do something with something that is not usually seen in a restaurant, and that's a pair of iPhone or iPod buds. You're given a shell in which, of course, you can hear the sound of the sea, but there's an iPod in there. You put the earbuds in your ears, and you hear the waves breaking, and you eat the food, and you're transported back to the sea. At least that's the idea. So that's one extreme version of flavor tripping, taking you to the ocean when you're not there. Some examples of the kinds of things that chefs are doing with the senses these days. And now Linda will talk about what's really going on when we're enjoying the simplest things or the most complex things.
Well, now you've gotten a beautiful picture of cuisine from the point of view of restaurants and very creative thinking. Now we're going to take you into the laboratory, and we're going to do a little flavor tripping there. We're actually going to really do it tonight. And I also want to tell you about some things that sometimes people believe about taste that are not true. So I'm going to tell you about some myths, tell you a little bit about genetic variation, and I'm delighted to tell you that we're going to have miracle fruit for you. And we've arranged a bit of an experiment. You all have a questionnaire. Fill it out until you get down to the part where you're going to rate the strawberry and the lemon. At the end, we're going to go out, and you're going to be given strawberry, lemon, and a miracle fruit tablet, which I'll tell you more about in a bit. The main thing I have to warn you about is rate these first before you do anything with miracle fruit. You're going to sniff each one, rate the smell, rate the sweetness, rate the sourness, rate the flavor intensity. And then when you put this tablet in your mouth, you must let it dissolve slowly. The miracle fruit is a contact effect. So you need to have it touch as much of your tongue as you can. If you chew it and swallow it, you'll get very little benefit from it. You've got to let it dissolve slowly and have a topical effect on your tongue. Now, what I'm going to try to do is tell you a little bit about the sensory hedonic properties of food and a little bit about why we know what we like. I wish I could tell you more about this. There's a lot we don't know, but let me begin with a taste myth. How many of you have seen a picture of a tongue map like this in some book? Well, I'm delighted to tell you it is totally bogus. It turns out that it was done by a Harvard professor who mistranslated a German article. There never was any empirical evidence for this tongue map. There still isn't any, and you still find it in remarkable textbooks. I've been trying to get this out of textbooks for years with very little success. If any of you want to ask me later exactly how the error came about, I can tell you in boring detail, but I won't go into it now. What I do want to tell you is that the sensations that come from the mouth and the nose, well, the mouth, taste and oral burn, we all know about that, and oral touch, and temperature. And we know a great deal about how these sensations are produced. Taste is produced by two nerves. Well, I'm not even going to go into that in detail. But we know a great deal about the nerves. But what's important is that they interact, and they interact in the brain. Each one of them projects its information up to the brain. There are connections among them, and those connections are extraordinarily important. Not only do they determine what we experience normally, they determine what happens to patients who have problems with one nerve or another. And one more sensation, and this is particularly important, and the example I use is chocolate. When you eat chocolate, the sensation seems to come from your mouth, but in fact it does not at all. What happens when you put something like chocolate pudding in your mouth and chew and swallow it, the chocolate aroma is forced up behind. You see the retronasal passage? The aroma is forced up behind the palate into the nasal cavity. So chocolate is entirely a smell. and it's being perceived by receptors up here under the eye. Why do we have the impression that chocolate's coming from the mouth? We don't know for certain, but we think it has a lot to do with touch being excited in the mouth when you chew and swallow. This is a source of active research right now, but is very, very misunderstood. True taste is sweet, salt, sour, bitter. I'll come to umami later if you all think that's a fifth basic taste. I hope I can persuade you otherwise. Chocolate is entirely an odor. Roast beef's an odor. All lemon, butterscotch, all the things that we love as flavors are really odors perceived retronasally. We call flavor is usually technically applied to retronasal olfaction plus true taste. But this is probably the most significant thing you need to know to understand our experiences of food. Now, exciting, taste inhibits oral burn and oral touch. So if you damage taste, oral burn and oral touch go up. Taste intensifies retronasal olfaction. So if you damage taste, retronasal olfaction goes down. This becomes incredibly important for patients who have taste damage and notice a lot of things going on that don't have anything to do with taste at all. Let me briefly talk about this. We know a great deal about what makes us like or dislike taste and smell. And I hope you'll be surprised to know that the affect associated with taste, sweet, salty, sour, bitter, is hardwired in the brain. You're born with it. You require no experience. This is because those sensations solve immediate nutritional problems that help you to survive. So nature just said, you don't have to learn anything. We're going to equip you with this. So a newborn baby loves sweet, hates bitter. Pain is hardwired. You don't have to learn to hate pain. You're just hardwired that way. Flavor is not hardwired. The love of olfaction, either ortho or retronasal, is learned primarily. Now, most recently, there's a suspicion that maybe there are a few odors that are hardwired, and these come from the vegetable and fruit world, and maybe odors tightly connected to specific nutrients that are very valuable. It's a very controversial idea. We're trying to test it right now, but for the most part, the love and hate of a smell perceived either orthonasally through the nose, sniffing, or retronasally, flavor, is learned. Taste labels nutrients. Well, I actually already told you that. I'm not going to bother with that. Olfaction doesn't label nutrients. In fact, it's interesting. Olfaction is a labeling system essentially for a nonverbal organism. It labels objects. If you look at what the nutrients taste and smell like, it's interesting. If the nutrients we divide into macronutrients, you get calories from those. Micronutrients, like vitamins and minerals. Anti-nutrients, which are poison. And note that among the macronutrients, the only one that has a taste is carbohydrate, and that's the only ones of those are sugar, and they're sweet. Vitamins, it doesn't matter what they taste like. They're too dilute to be perceived except for vitamin C. Minerals are salty and bitter. Poisons are usually bitter. And look at the smell column. 0. None of the nutrients have any odor. Odor is characteristic of objects in which there are nutrients. And so we learn. This is why taste is hardwired, because it really marks nutrients. And olfaction is learned because we have to learn the object that the nutrient comes in. One of the most astonishing things about learning is that it's hard to produce a condition preference. You have to have several pairings. But in one trial, I can make you hate an odor. All you have to do is pair it with nausea. How many of you have gotten sick and been unable to eat anything that you had to eat at the time you got sick? Beautiful. The typical example, the undergraduate's first alcohol binge. We've studied those in considerable detail. And you can make some of it. By the way, this is clinically becomes very important in chemotherapy or radiation therapy, which produces nausea. Patients getting chemo or radiation therapy develop disgust reactions to a lot of foods because it's paired with the nausea. A brilliant psychologist, Eileen Bernstein, discovered how to use that to protect you. She actually gives patients a novel flavor just before they're going to get their therapy that's going to make them nauseated. And the nausea conditioning scapegoats onto the novel flavor and protects the diet. So, for example, she used root beer lifesavers. You can make children getting chemotherapy hate root beer lifesavers, but in doing so, you can protect their diet. One of the cheapest medical interventions I've ever heard of. Now, I'm going to tell you about a couple controversies. Umami and fat. You probably are going to run into some place that tells you umami is a fifth basic taste. The origin of this comes from advertising people who work for Ajinomoto. Somebody convinced them that if umami were a fifth basic taste, they would sell more MSG. Well, it isn't a fifth basic taste, but in the midst of all of this, a very, very good scientist discovered there are receptors for glutamate in the mouth, and the Ajinomoto people seized on this and claimed this is the source of umami. Not really. So let me tell you what's really going on with fat and umami. First of all, those are very large molecules, particularly fat. Protein and fat are very important nutritional items, okay? Proteins are made up of a sequence of amino acids. Now, you can't taste a protein. The molecule's too large to stimulate either taste or smell receptors. But you can taste glutamate, which happens to be one of the amino acids. So is glutamate in the mouth important? No. It turns out that the taste receptors aren't just in the mouth. They're all through the GI tract. So the mouth is important for salty, sweet, sour, and bitter. But when you swallow protein, digestion breaks it into its component parts, and glutamate receptors in the stomach respond to the glutamate, and they tell the brain that you ate protein. The brain wants you to eat protein, so it's wired to make you like the sensory characteristics that came in with the protein. So what do you learn to like? Roast beef, chicken. You learn to like protein. It's not that it tastes like glutamate. It does not taste like glutamate. If glutamate really were a protein receptor in the mouth, it would be a very bad one, because most proteins don't taste like glutamate at all. Similarly, fats. Fats are made up of chains of fatty acids attached to sort of a glycerol backbone. Put them into the stomach, and this is the digestion with protein. They break into fatty acids, and there are fatty acid receptors in the stomach. So again, the fatty acid receptors tell the brain, you ate fat. Well, although we worry about our fat intake, the fact is the brain wants you to eat fat because it's a very important source of calories. So you learn to like the characteristics that came in with the fat. Why do we like French fries? We like French fries because the sensations come with fat. Now, what does this mean for trying to get fat out of the diet? A little depressing. The fact is, if you produce a phenomenal substitute for fat, has all the right sensory properties, but doesn't produce any calories, your brain catches on very, very quickly and makes you learn not to like that substance. Remember that line of foods where they call snack wows? Those low-calorie things? You notice they didn't last in the market? You sell things like that to people, and the brain figures out they don't have the calories of what they're supposed to be. Fake ice cream. The brain tells the difference. I mean, Haagen-Dazs and fake ice cream are a little different, but not that much different, until the brain starts to notice the fact that Haagen-Dazs comes with calories, and those fake ice creams don't. So very quickly, you're going to discriminate extremely well among them. What does it mean for getting fat out of our diet? Well, it's not a very happy story, because it's going to be very hard to do. You're fighting biology. Now, let's look at some genetic differences. Everybody got a little piece of paper when you came in? This is PROP. Now, let me tell you what this is. This is not, I have to warn you, it's not the blue sticker. We sometimes have confusion about that. The blue stickers just hold the envelope closed. So take it open, rip it open, and bring out the white disc. But don't do anything to it until I tell you what to do. This little piece of paper contains 1.6 milligrams of PROP. This is a thyroid suppressant for people with Graves' disease. If you took it as a medication, you'd consume about 200 milligrams a day. You're going to get, if you taste this paper, even if you ate the paper, 1.6 milligrams, which is a trivial amount. Nonetheless, my IRB is aggressive, and if you have food allergies, are worried about this, are pregnant, don't taste this. It will not hurt you at all, but the IRB is worried, and so I have to tell you not to taste it. Now, I'm going to show you what I can do. I'm a genetic recessive for the bitter receptor site. Don't do this. What you need to do is take this piece of paper and just touch an edge to your tongue and see if you taste it. If it's bitter, don't taste anymore. Some of you will get intense bitter very quickly. Have we got any that are getting an intense bitter? Okay. Don't take any more. Don't put any more in your mouth. Now watch what I can do. I've just put the whole thing in my mouth. I'm getting it really wet in my saliva. I'm moving it all around. I taste absolutely nothing. It's a piece of paper. I'm a recessive. I don't have any receptors that find this. Now, how many of you could do, ultimately, if you don't taste it, put a little more in and see if you can ultimately put the whole thing in. If you goof and it turns out to be bitter, there will be sweet things waiting for you outside. How many people couldn't taste it at all, like me? How many people tasted it and it was really awful? And how many people tasted it was bitter, wasn't too bad? This is a very good distribution. We have about as many people who got the intense bitter as didn't taste it, which is about what you expect in a fairly random sample. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this. We have here a dish of ordinary blue food coloring and a swab. And we're going to paint our tongues blue. This is my postdoc, Lori Lucchina, swabbing her tongue. Now we're going to stick our tongue under a piece of plastic. And you notice the little pink circles that are beginning to emerge? The reason we do this with blue food coloring is the coloring does not stain fungiform papilla very well, and they're the structures that hold taste buds. So we can count these structures in living humans, and we're now going to put Lori on a table, and we're going to look at her tongue under magnification. And this is a pretty ordinary tongue. You see those lighter circles? Those are the fungiform papilla that hold taste buds, okay? This is a tongue that's kind of polka dotted with them. Now, keep a mental image of that. I'm going to show you what a super taster tongue looks like. Those of you who got intense bitter from the probe paper, here's what your tongue looks like. Now, you have good eyes. You could see that. But just in case it was a little hard to see, let me show you how we actually count these in the laboratory. We draw a circle that's 6 millimeters in diameter. That's about the diameter of our reinforcement that you use for note paper. And I should tell you, why do we use this? We had a little high school kid doing a science fair project. And she went to the stationery store, bought these, and used them as templates. And we thought that was just a brilliant idea, so we just copied her, and we do the same. And by the way, with a magnifying glass and a flashlight, you can count these structures. Of course, we use a $25,000 microscope and computer system to do it in the laboratory. Now, that red circle is the same size on both tongues. Now, I have outlined the fungiform papilla, pulled them over so that you can see them. And a super taster can have up to 60 of these fungiform papilla in the template area. And by the way, you can do this at home. Blue food coloring, paint your tongue, look at it in a magnifying mirror. The tongue below, and I should tell you, that upper tongue is the tongue of a very famous taste geneticist named Steve Wooding. He said I could say his name. The lower picture isn't even a very good non-taster. My daughter is the best non-taster we have found. Note, I'm a non-taster. My husband is a non-taster. This is a Mendelian recessive. If you understand the genetics, you'll know why I say, thank goodness the children are both non-tasters. If they hadn't be, I would be in big trouble. My daughter has 5 fungiform papilla in this size. I don't have a picture of her tongue with our new microscope. I have to get one. So the difference here is really huge. What do we know about super tasters? Well, women are more likely to be super tasters than men are. Super tasting varies by race. Caucasians have the fewest supertasters. In the U.S., about 10% of the population have more than 35 fungiform papillae in the template area, to give you some idea. But notice, men are more likely to be non-tasters. Caucasians are more likely to be non-tasters. Ladies, do I have to tell you anything about white men and taste? Now, how do we measure the differences in the taste worlds of these groups? It turns out that the ordinary methods don't work, and I'm going to show you why they don't. We're going to set up an experiment, and we're going to try to learn whether these two groups of people, those the supertasters with lots of fungiform papillae and the rest with very few, whether they taste sweet alike or not. So we've got our two groups. We're going to ask them to describe the sweetness of a Coke on a line that goes from 0, no sweetness, to 100, which is the most intense sweetness you've ever experienced. Now, isn't this interesting? When we do this, everybody responds the same way. Everybody marks the sweetness of a Coke about 2/3 of the way up. So it suggests that everybody tastes sweet the same, no matter how many fungiform papillae they have. Is that true? Absolutely not. The problem is in the method. Now, let us take these subjects into the room next door and put earphones on all of them. Now, we're going to ask them to match the sweetness of the Coke to the loudness of a tone. And our supertasters are going to turn the tone way up to 90 decibels, the loudness of a train whistle. And those with fewer fungiform papillae are going to turn it down to 80 decibels, which is the loudness of a telephone dial tone. Now, we know a lot about hearing, and we know that a difference of 10 decibels is a difference of a factor of 2 in loudness. So we know that the supertasters have matched the Coke sweetness to a loudness twice as intense as the others, suggesting that the supertasters are actually experiencing twice the sweetness. Now, our ordinary method couldn't see this. Our supertasters are living in a neon taste world compared to the pastel taste world of somebody like me. So their taste world is expanded. And if you use an ordinary method that treats the sweetest taste you've ever had as the same across everybody, it won't be able to see this difference because sweet isn't the same to everybody. Here's what really happened in our experiment. Here's what we thought happened over on the right. But here's what really happened. It turns out that to supertasters, the sweetest taste they've ever experienced is actually twice as sweet as the sweetest taste the others have ever experienced. So I've put the X's exactly where they were here, but you can see in reality the supertaster is experiencing twice the sweetness. Now that we know how to do it correctly, let's show you what we've learned. We've learned that this is a correlation between, in this case, bitterness of prop, sugar, quinine, salt, and citric acid. They all correlate. Bottom line is all 4 basic tastes taste more intense to supertasters by a factor of 2, depending on how good the supertasters is, maybe even by a factor of 3. But it doesn't stop there because the anatomy of the taste bud is as follows. In this fungiform papilla, the taste buds are buried in the tissue, about 6 on average to each fungiform papilla. Surrounding each taste bud is a basket of pain fibers. This means the people with the most fungiform papilla feel the most oral pain. So if we look at something like a jalapeno pepper, we can actually correlate the oral burn against the bitterness of prop. And I'm actually showing you for 100 parts per million because that's about the amount in a jalapeno pepper. You know when you watch the Food Channel and you watch these people with their pepper eating contest, the winner is a non-taster. What about touch? It turns out the core of each fungiform papilla has touch fibers in it. So the creamy, thick, viscous sensations you get from fat are much more intense to supertasters. Lovely correlation. Think about what this means. Now, retronasal olfaction. That shouldn't be connected to the mouth at all. But it is because of a bizarre connection between taste and retronasal olfaction in the brain. We don't understand it, but we know it's there. So what does it mean? It means our non-tasters sniff something like chocolate and taste flavor of chocolate relatively similarly. Our super tasters sniff it the same, but they put it in their mouth and isn't just chocolate. It's chocolate. Super tasters live in a neon food world. Non-tasters live in a pastel food world. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a bit, and we can talk more about this later, but I want to very quickly tell you about taste modifiers, and the one that's most important is miracle fruit, because this is the one you're going to experience. I'm going to whip through this kind of fast. We can talk about it more when you get outside. I want to show you first what the lovely miracle fruit looks like. It looks like in its pure form a Spanish peanut, bright red, with a huge pit inside and a very thin layer of flesh. I could have brought frozen berries, but they're very awkward to deal with. So instead of that, I brought a preparation of miracle fruit that's commercially made. They freeze-dry the miracle fruit and then press the freeze-dried berry into a tablet called Fruities. You're all going to get a Fruity. And this is what you need to let dissolve slowly, because this is freeze-dried miracle fruit pressed into a tablet, and you really need to let it go all over your tongue surface. And I'll tell you a little bit about what you're going to experience, but because I won't be able to conceal it from you. When you taste a lemon after miracle fruit, it'll taste like lemonade. And the strawberry that you taste after miracle fruit will probably be the sweetest strawberry you've ever tasted. How does this work? Well, this is the theory. The active ingredient in miracle fruit is a protein with a sugar molecule on it. And it sits on the tongue, but the sugar molecule can't get into the sweet receptor. It's held out of it. Now, you enter acid in the mouth, and the sweet receptor sort of puckers up and comes up to the point where the sugar molecule touches it. So basically what you get with miracle fruit is one sugar molecule dropping into the sweet receptor site, being pulled back out because it's attached to the protein, dropping back in, being pulled back out. And you're getting a tremendous amount of sweet taste for very, very few calories because a few sugar molecules are doing all the work. Well, I'm not even going to bother with that. So what you're going to do with this questionnaire when you go out is you're going to rate everything first. You've seen how the questionnaire works. Now just let me summarize. We're going to have you use 0 equals no sensation. 100 equals the strongest sensation of any kind you've ever experienced. It could be the brightness of the sun, the loudness of a jet plane, the worst pain you've ever had, whatever for you is top. So 0 to 100 covers your entire intensity range for taste. And using that scale, or for any sensation, using that scale, you sniff the strawberry, then taste it, and rate its sweetness, sourness, and the intensity of the strawberry flavor. You do the same with the lemon. Did you have a question? Yes, yeah. Fill out the practice part, which is just to show that you can use the scale correctly. If you have any questions, we can talk about it out there when you start doing it. And one more thing I want to show you. We now know something about super tasters we didn't know before. This is plotting on the scale I've just explained, but butterflied for affect. We've asked people to rate how much they like their favorite food and how much they don't like their least favorite food to give us a range of hedonics. And look at this. Super tasters have much more extreme hedonic range. What they like, they love. And what they don't like, they really hate. We do not understand this, but it is a very robust effect that we've seen in separate studies. So this is telling us something about the love of food of super tasters that I hope we're going to learn more about. I'm going to finish there so we can go out and have our miracle food party. I'm sorry, you had a question back there? You know, that's a really good question. The question is, are babies and children different? Doggone it, babies cannot judge using the lines we're using here. So we cannot compare them accurately to adults. Children have to be about 6 years of age before they can perform this task. We really don't know the answer to that.